Following an earlier interview that Diane Abbott, the Shadow Home Secretary, had done about the figures on policing, and I'm happy to say that Diane Abbott is here with me now. Despite what Jeremy Corbyn has said, it is embarrassing. It's embarrassing that you don't know your figures on a key policy.
I do know my figures, and as you will know, I did 7 interviews that morning, and that was the 7th, and I misspoke. But I do know my figures.
You didn't know them in that interview. Let's have a listen to it. In fact, it was with LBC and Nick Ferrari. Let's just take a listen and viewers can make up their own minds.
So how much would 10,000 police officers cost?
Well, if we recruit the 10,000 police men and women over a 4-year period, we believe it'll be about £300,000.
£300,000 for 10,000 police officers? What are you paying them?
Oh, I mean, sorry.
How much will they cost?
It will cost about £80 million.
About £80 million?
Yeah.
Diane Abbott, that is hugely embarrassing. It's not just misspeaking, to quote you a bit earlier. You just don't know your figures and you're not on top of your brief.
If I didn't know my figures, why was I able to do 6 other interviews and give the figures correctly? And you need to ask why the Conservative Party is so anxious to move the debate away from the 20,000 police officers.
We'll come on to that because we're going to speak to a Conservative in just a moment. But back to that interview. Never mind that you did 6 or 7 interviews. This is now an election campaign. Front benchers and government ministers are expected to do reams of interviews. This was a major policy announcement for you. By your own words, you want to make this a cornerstone of your manifesto. You didn't know the figures.
I did know my figures, and if you'd listened...
Why didn't you say them then?
Because I misspoke, as you heard. If I didn't know my figures, I wouldn't have been able to repeat them correctly in 6 other interviews.
Which interviews did you correct them? Because I listened to one of those interviews. You didn't mention the figures at all. You said it was all going to be costed and it would be in the manifesto.
I did 6 other interviews. The point
But
is...
you didn't mention the figures in those other interviews. You decided to talk about the figures, and they are basic figures. £300,000, which, as Nick Ferrari said, would have meant £30 per police officer. That's embarrassing. You were then struggling to correct that figure. Did you actually not know them at all and you were guessing when you were asked about it on air? Or what is your explanation?
I knew the figures because I've repeated them many times.
You haven't. I haven't heard you repeat them at all. I've just heard them from that interview.
I can repeat them now. And I'm concerned that you don't want to talk about policing, which is something the public is concerned in, particularly the rise in violent crime. And you do want to go over and over. And Nick Ferrari...
But that's your fault, Diane Abbott. I mean, you want to talk about the issue, and we were all prepared to talk about the issue of policing and the claims that you are making that the police forces have been underfunded and you want to recruit more officers. But by going on air on a major interview where you just completely fluffed the figures, whether you knew them or you just chose not to say them or you couldn't remember them, actually doesn't do your cause any good.
The public will understand that you're not willing to talk about the real issues, and the real issues are that we have lost 20,000 police officers since 2010 and we're seeing a rise in violent crime.
You want to be Home Secretary. You want to be Home Secretary. How do you think an interview like that... We couldn't find the figures in a press release, by the way, earlier, so I do dispute you claiming that you did know those figures. And if you didn't know those figures, how can you claim to want to be Home Secretary in charge of the police forces of England and Wales? Do you think you've instilled confidence in either the police forces or the voters?
People that listened to any of the interviews I gave this morning, with the exception of the LBC interview, will know that I do know the figures. And I wish you were prepared to talk about policing.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about policing, which is why we have Dominic Raab, a Conservative, on the programme. I'll talk to him about that. But people will be worried that you are not across what you should be in terms of this brief that you came on the airwaves to announce as a key part of your policy. I mean, do you think it's important to attach the right figures to major spending commitments in this election?
Of course I think that, and that's why I attached the right figures in 6 interviews out of 7. I also think it's important that a major programme like yours is prepared to talk to the Labour spokesperson about policing.
Yes.
Because people deserve to know what the Labour Party is saying.
All right, well, let's talk about how you're going
issues.
to pay for it, which is by reversing the cuts to capital gains tax. So what level of capital gains tax will it be under Labour?
We are going to reverse the cuts in capital gains tax in order to fund a number of
No,
things,
I understand that, but what level will it be?
Including the 10,000 police officers. But just let me say why it's important to have 10,000 more policemen, because we've lost 20,000 under Theresa May and we've seen a rise in violent crime. We currently have some of the lowest rates of capital gains tax in Europe.
Right, but what are they? What will they be under Labour? If you win the election, what will you reverse the cuts to be? What will the two levels of capital gains tax be?
We will bring them back to where they were before. That's the point.
And what are those levels?
The point is that it will save us nearly £2.7 billion, and that's what we're going to use both to pay for the 10,000 policemen and for other areas of our manifesto. And just in case you're saying that none of it's costed, we will produce a manifesto which is costed and is paid for. And we hope, as the campaign goes on, that people like yourself will be more willing to talk about the issues.
And we really will. But I think what voters will want to know is that they can trust you with the figures and with the finances. And just one last time, because I fear you don't know what the levels of capital gains tax are now and what they would be if you did reverse them. Yes, it would raise £2.7 billion. That is the figure you put out. But what will the levels of capital gains tax be?
It's not the figure that we've put out. That's the figure in the government's own red book, that if we reverse the cuts that the government has announced, that we will raise at least £2.7 billion. And we believe that we can put that money to better use than on tax cuts for the top 5%.
Dominic Raab, let's have a look at the substance of this issue, because, as Diane Abbott says, there have been cuts since there's been a coalition government and a Conservative government. Last month, the lead inspector of policing in this country said it is in a potentially perilous state, the issue of policing. Now, that's some message for the Conservatives to take into election after being in power for 7 years.
Well, that's obviously not our message. Our message is that actually, if you look at the crime survey for England and Wales, crime overall is down by a third. Violent crime since 2010 is down by 22%.
Not according to police recorded crime.
Sorry, Joe, can I just finish the answer? And we tend to rely on the crime surveys now more than the police recorded crimes because they're regarded as a more credible gauge. But certainly it's also true to say, even on the crime survey, there's been an uptick in violent offences against the person, although the ONS say it's not statistically significant. But the raw truth is you're not going to get the investment in policing or the NHS or any of our other public services unless you've got strong handling of the economy. And just look at the shambles today of Diane's handling of those basic figures on one policy.
We've done that.
Imagine for a moment it was inflicted on the economy as a whole.
Right, well, we've done that and we've interviewed Diane about those figures. Let's get back to the substance, which are cuts.
Well,
that's what we've got to look forward to under a Conservative government, are further cuts to policing. Is that right?
No, look,
so there aren't going to be any further cuts to policing?
Joe, I was asked to come on to talk about Brexit, but I'm very happy to talk about crime. You'll get our proposals when the manifesto comes out, but at the moment, look, we're happy to talk about our record. Yes, there have been some difficult decisions when it comes to police budgets.
Police budgets have shrunk by 22% on average.
What the public care about most is what's happening to crime, down by a third, violent crime down by 22% on the Crime in England and Wales survey. Those are the facts.
Right.
But even the ONS says there is a measurable increase in violent crime.
They said it was statistically insignificant.
No, they also said there was a measurable increase, and you will know that violent crime, particularly gun crime and knife crime, is what frightens the public.
I agree,
most.
but it's down by 22% since you guys were last on the watch.
ONS
and
says
you
it's
can't
gone up.
answer the basic figures. How are you going to pay for this? Or how many police are you going to put on the street?
You can't answer questions about your record in losing police officers.
I can say, look, we've made some difficult decisions, but crime down overall, violent crime down by 22%.
So why is the independent watchdog warning that what is happening is an unconscious form of rationing?
Well,
those were her words. If you are wanting to be measured on your record, according to the independent watchdog, that record is not very good.
Well, look, you can take a selective quote from...
Well, it's not a selective quote. This is the lead inspector, Inspector Joe,
but what I'm going to point to is since 2010, 7 years, what has happened to crime, and in particular violent crime, which is the attack that Labour are going on, and it's down. And the public know it. When I knock on doors, no one seriously thinks Diane Abbott or Jeremy Corbyn
you just said there's been an uptick, even if you say it's statistically irrelevant.
Hang
on. Do you accept that knife crime and gun crime...
I think Joe's asking the questions.
Yeah,
You're trying to answer them. You're having enough trouble
with
that man, so I'll take questions from Joe.
Do you accept that knife crime and gun crime has gone up in the Metropolitan Police area?
Well,
are you denying that?
Sorry, Diane. if you're talking about specifically about London, I don't have the geographical figures. What I've said very clearly is England and Wales, violent crime down by 22% since 2010. Yes, there's been an increase recently, but even the ONS, the guardian of the statistics, say it's statistically insignificant. We'll run on our record. You've got nothing credible to say on this issue. No one out there trusts you on this issue because you can't get the basic facts right.
Well, as it so happens, there was a press release that was put out by Labour which did mention the £300 million figure as the cost. Diane didn't use it and didn't seem to know it in that interview. I did use it in other interviews. But you didn't use it in that interview. You must accept that does reduce your credibility. It allows your opponents to attack you in the way Dominic Raab is.
I think it reduces the media credibility because they're not prepared to talk about.
Well, you can distract by blaming the media, Diane Abbott, but it doesn't help your cause if you give ammunition to your opponents. What does it do to Labour campaigners out on the streets when they're having to do and fight fires, unnecessary fires, on a key bit of policy from Labour?
What people want to know is what this government's going to do about the rising gun crime and knife crime in areas like London, and this is what we're not hearing from Dominic Raab.
Right. I mean, let's talk about the figures again. Hang on. Let's talk about the figures though broadly. You're right. The ONS does say that the uptick in violent crime is pretty small at the moment, but they do say it is a warning of what is to come. If you do look at London, then there has been an increase in knife crime that Cressida Dick says she is extremely worried about. Are you saying that has nothing to do with 22% cuts on average across police forces?
What I'm saying is across the board, what the people, voters care about is not what we put in terms of either money ultimately or in terms of numbers of police officers or police stations. They care about the end product, and crime is down by a third, violent crime is down by 22%. But we are not for a moment complacent. And if you look at the changes we've made on things like stop and search, but also on things like sentences for knife possession, we will continue to be absolutely vigilant and have zero tolerance on those most serious levels of crime. What we're not going to do is, I'm afraid, take one isolated statistic for one isolated area and not defend our record nationally,
but the ONS,
which is strong.
Yeah, but hang on, the ONS does say even after taking better reporting into account, homicides, American term, and knife crimes are showing small but genuine increases. And I put it to you again, people may ask, if cuts are going to continue under a Tory government, if you win the election, then those figures are only going to increase.
What I think the country understands is we have to cut our coat according to our cloth.
So you
can't rely on the Labour Party for that. And at the same time, we can reform our public services, make them deliver something like the third cut in crime that we've seen, 20% cut in violent crime. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. But you've got to trust the strong leadership, and only the Tories are giving it to you.
Right. Looking at this issue, I mean, I remember with Tony Blair, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. It's not the number one issue for voters, is it, Philip Cowley? Could it become a much bigger issue in this election campaign?
I don't think so. I think the whole exchange has been sort of symbolic of the election so far, really, because you've got Labour putting out policy, which they've been doing almost day on day since the election was called. And actually policy which on the whole polls very well when you poll about the individual policies. They're quite popular policies. And the attack then comes not on the policy detail, but on whether Labour can deliver the policy. And that basically is what we're going to see, I think, week in, week out for the rest of the election. And I think that's why, if there is a import to Diane's suboptimal interview this morning, that's it. It's because it speaks to competence, which is the attack line that the Conservatives are pushing. So in the exchange we've just had, it's all been policy detail against competence. And that's what we're going to see for the next 5 or 6 weeks.
Dominic Raab, you're staying with us. Diane Abbott, thank you.